Imagine what your life could look like if you could retire 5 or 10 years earlier than what you're currently thinking. When you're at the prime of the youth of your senior years and you have this burning desire to do these things that you haven't been able to do for the last 20, 30, 40 years while you've been working away, and the freedom that retirement could give you. So why don't people retire sooner? One of the primary reasons is they just can't afford to do it. But I've been a financial advisor for over 20 years. I've seen what works from a financial standpoint, and I've seen what doesn't. And in today's video, I'm going to share with you the 5 main secrets to being able to build your nest egg more quickly and be able to enjoy the youth of your senior years. So let's jump in. Unfortunately, we're not thinking about our investments the right way. What are the factors that are going to determine our success? And if you were to poll people and say, how do you get good, solid investment returns? Most people are going to say, well, it's stock selection. In fact, there was a study that was done and where they polled investors, and people said the number 1 factor is stock selection. The number 2 factor is market timing. Number 3 is really a group of other answers, miscellaneous other answers for 20% of the success. And asset allocation is another 7.6%. But there was a famous study that was done in 1986 and rerun again in 1991. It's the Brinson study, where they looked at the actual results for mutual funds and what were the factors that made a difference between good, solid returns and mediocre returns. And you know what? It was not stock selection. You can see stock selection, according to the Brinson study, which is an academic study that looked at, I believe it was 91 pension funds, just under 100. So stock selection only accounted for less than 5% of the return of a portfolio. So of 100, if there were 100 points that could be allocated, only 5 of those came from stock selection. So really insignificant. What really mattered, 94% of a fund's success, was asset allocation. And that is great news for you and I. Why is it great news? Because asset allocation is something that most of us can get right. It's super important. We probably won't get it right without working with a professional, but you don't have to work with a professional for 20 years to get help on asset allocation. So most folks can work with a financial advisor to figure out what is the right asset allocation. What percent of your portfolio should be in stocks and what percent should be in bonds. And again, this is great news because you can have a relationship with a financial advisor for a couple months and they can get to know you well enough to give you guidance in this area. Now, given how important it is, I think it's critical that you consider working with a professional. You don't want to just wing it and say, well, I should be 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds, or 70-30. You really want somebody that's been doing this for decades, that's helped other people navigate their journey, to help you out in your decision as well, in part because we don't know what we don't know when we're doing this. So rule number 1 here is asset allocation is key. That's secret number 1. Okay, before we move on, I also want to point out the previous study, the Brinson study, was done in the United States, but there was a follow-on study that looked at other countries. And you can see here, it's 91% of the success for a mutual fund is based on their asset allocation, not their stock selection. And you can see in Canada, it's 86%. In the United Kingdom, it's 80% of the success. In Australia, 89%. So this is one of these truths, these fundamental truths, that asset allocation is the main driver. And you can see that 91 pension fund study that I did right there at the very end, 93.6% of a fund's success. So that's number 1. Number 2 is staying disciplined. Once you get that asset allocation, being able to stick with that asset allocation in both good times and in bad times. It's super important that we do that. Because if we blow out of our investments, if we get scared and we allow our emotions, scary headlines, COVID is a great example. If we, in the first 100 days of COVID, things were very scary. We didn't know where we headed into, a totally uncharted chapter of U.S. history from an economic standpoint. Could we be looking at at another Great Depression? We could have, right? Nobody knew. And so it was a very scary time. But Vanguard did a study, and they have a report that's similar to this video. It's different than my video, but our conclusions are very similar. And Vanguard has a really interesting chart in their report that shows what happened to the people that blew out during COVID and sold their stocks. They allowed themselves to become forced sellers in a down market. We're going to come back to that term in a minute. But what happened? You can see people that blew out of the stock market, and then who came back into the market. So as early as the end of July 2020, for people that came back in then, you can see from that period, from the start of COVID until the end of 2022, the people that stayed the course were rewarded a 60-40 portfolio with a 21% return. People that fled the market, people that allowed themselves to become forced sellers, ended up essentially being flat. They were slightly negative during that period of time. And this can have devastating impacts. Now, this is a fairly short period of time. If your portfolio misses out on a 20% return, is that going to have a significant impact on your life? It could, right? If you have $500,000 in a portfolio, that 20% return represents $100,000. So for the people that blew out, a couple of years later, they were still at $500,000. Where the people that were able to stay the course, to not sell their stocks because they were afraid, they ended up with a 21% return, or instead of $500,000, $600,000. So it's a real key, being able to avoid being a forced seller in a down market. Now, the market's going to go up and down. That's just what stock markets do. But you're not going to be hurt by these downturns in the market as long as you don't have to sell stocks when they're low. If you have to sell stocks when they're low, and typically there's two reasons people sell stocks when they're low. The first one is because of the anxiety, the acute worrying that they have about whatever's happening in the world, the scary headlines. And for mental reasons, they just can't sleep. And to eliminate the pain, they say, well, I'm going to sell these stocks that are causing me all this pain, that are causing me to lose all this money. I want nothing to do with them. And I'll buy back in when the market's lower. Fair warning, that is the siren song in the investing industry. That is what destroys retirement plans, is when people blow out like that. So what you do to protect yourself from scary times like COVID, okay? So COVID really started to get ugly in the United States towards the end of February of 2020, early March 2020, and the market was going down. So what could a financial advisor, what were people like me doing to protect my clients from that downturn? Candidly, what we were doing is what we did 2 years earlier, 3 years earlier, 5 years earlier, when the market was at an all-time high. And we were talking with our clients and explaining, hey, any market that can be up 20, 30% can also be down 20 or 30%. So let's make sure we have the right asset allocation. And if we don't, if we're too exposed to stocks, let's sell now while the market's high so that we can get a full price for what we're doing to rebalance. Let's say somebody was 80% stocks and maybe they should have been 60% stocks. Boy, it's a lot better for you to do that when the market's at an all-time high than when something's scary happening and the market has just plummeted 20, 30, 40%. So getting that asset allocation right and staying the course is so important. Okay, the third one, and this is really the only of the five, this is really the only one that requires some sacrifice. The other ones are really just being strategic. and thinking about your investments better and executing on your strategy better and thinking about what are the components of your strategy that really matter. But the third one is building your base, your money base, as soon as you can, so that you have both a base of money, you have hundreds of thousands of dollars, you have that base of money, but you also have time working on your side. So there's a famous investor by the name of Charlie Munger, and he was Warren Buffett's business partner. They started Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway. They started that together, and Warren is the one that most average Americans know, but Charlie Munger is very much, or was very much, Warren Buffett's equal. And Charlie had a saying, I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to paraphrase, you'll see why in a minute. The first $100,000 is really tough, but you got to do it. I don't care what you have to do. If it means walking everywhere and not eating anything that wasn't purchased with a coupon, find a way to get your hands on $100,000. And after that, you can ease off the gas a little bit. So Charlie's saying this because he wants you to have that base. And I'm gonna show you why Charlie said this first, and then I'm gonna make a change to what Charlie said. Okay, this is why Charlie said this. This is a chart of how long it takes to save $1 million. And this is assuming that a family can save $10,000 a year and that they get a 7% return on that money in their portfolio, not in the bank account somewhere, but in the portfolio, right? They're getting a 7% net return. So they're saving this $10,000, so a little less than $1,000 a month. It's going to take them almost 8 years, 7.84 years to save that first $100,000. And of that, almost 80% of that first $100,000 is money that they had to put in. But here's why Charlie said what he said. Look at the second $100,000. So going from $100,000 to $200,000. Instead of 8 years, it takes just a tad over 5 years. But almost right away, look at the lower part of the chart here. The savings, what the family is putting in is only half of the growth from 100,000 to 200,000. The other is their money working hard for them. And when you go from 200,000 to 300,000, you can see now it takes less than 4 years. So almost half of the time, less than half of the time really, than what it took to save the first $100,000. And now their savings, their money is working harder for them than the family is working. Their money is growing more quickly because of the growth of the existing money than because of the growth of the money that they're putting in. Okay, so that shows why Charlie said, do what you have to do to save that first $100,000, right? But I think in today's, first off, I should share that Charlie said that in 1994. He was giving a talk to USC Business School students at the time in 1994. Ironically, I was able to meet Charlie in 1994 as well. I was in business school, different school. Charlie came to talk to my class and I got to meet him, which was great. But I'm updating Charlie's quote and saying, do what you have to do to get your hands on your first $250,000. And after that, you can ease off the gas a little bit. And the reason for that is, if we go back to that chart I was showing earlier, if you look at how long it takes to save $1 million, it's 31 years. That's a long time. And $100,000 isn't what it was in 1994. Neither is $1 million. I think back then, a lot of people could comfortably retire on $500,000. But now that number is closer to $1 million. So 31 years is a long time. So power your way through to the first 250, and then you can start to back off a little bit, and let your money start to work for you. You can see once you get to $300,000, it only takes an additional 3 years to go from $300,000 to $400,000, and almost 3/4 of that money is your money working for you. So really the magic starts happening at about $250,000. Okay, So that was secret number 3. Secret number 4, you're going to like secret number 4. Secret number 4 is I don't want you to sacrifice unnecessarily. I want you, as you approach your 50s, once you get that first $250,000, I don't think it makes sense to give up your 20s, your 30s, and your 40s in order to be able to retire in your 50s. Now that's me personally, and I've guided many people through this, but your 20s, 30s, and 40s are also supposed to be fun. So I want you to enjoy the journey. And then once you retire, I want you to enjoy your money that you've been saving. So many people, believe it or not, keep saving even when they're in the spending mode. So let's say somebody comes in, they say, I want to spend, $8,000 a month, and I want to have about $100,000, including Social Security. It is not at all unusual for that family to save $10,000 to $20,000 of that money. And I have to remind my clients, you don't have to save this anymore. I want you to enjoy it. And then I also want you to be a little skeptical of the 4% rule. And I want to share with you, so the 4% rule is a guideline for how much can you spend when you're in retirement. It was famously developed, I believe it was 1993. William Bengen is the gentleman that came up with the idea of using a statistical technique called Monte Carlo simulations. And basically trying to stress test our lives, right? We all live one life. But Benson said, boy, it'd really be good if we could, if we had a crystal ball and we could see what 10,000 hypothetical lives look like. And then say, okay, I want, 9,800 of those hypothetical lives where the people don't run out of money. And what is that number and how much can I spend? And so that's called the Monte Carlo simulation. And this is the output of it. And I want to start off with right at the top, the header there. We ran 10,000 simulations based on the assumptions that were put in, right? But the Monte Carlo simulation takes actual stock market returns, randomizes it, and then generates 10,000 hypothetical lives. And you can look at that and say, okay, I want, in Benson's case, he said, a 3% failure rate. Out of 10,000 cases, only 300 of these cases could people run out of money. And Benson felt, a 3% failure rate was acceptable. And it certainly is. I think it's too acceptable. What people don't talk about is Benson was an engineer, actually a rocket scientist, from MIT before he became a financial planner. Now, he ran his family's business after graduating from MIT, but that's his formal training. And as somebody whose undergrad is in engineering as well, you design a water pump, a flood system, a system to handle floods. You design that for the 90-year storm, right? Something that's very rarely going to happen. But boy, to plan your retirement planning based on the 90-year flood, based on the absolute worst case scenario, I think is overly conservative. So, and I can't tell you what the right answer is for you. None of what I'm sharing today is financial advice, but I can tell you, be cautious of that. The difference between spending 5% of your portfolio and 4%, that's a 25% increase. That's a lot. And that's gonna give you money maybe for an extra vacation or add some joy. So I want to encourage you to work with a financial advisor to have something like this done for yourself, but then to look into it and say, do I really need to plan for a 3% failure rate? For a lot of folks, for me personally, I'll tell you, for me, an 80% likelihood of success is probably good enough for me. And the reason is, if I find myself being unlucky, I should explain what you're seeing here in this chart. The lower end of that pale blue graph, those are the people that were unlucky. The top end of that, those were the 2,000 best cases. So you can see in this case, people were dying with over $3 million at the age of 90. That dark blue line is the median. So 5,000 simulations did better, 5,000 simulated lives did better and 5,000 did worse. So you can see they barely squeak by the median before they run out of money. And you can see people are running out of money at 81. So this is a situation where a lot of people would look at, and rightfully so in this case, the example I've given you, and say, you know, I want to have a better likelihood of success. So this is a pretty low likelihood of success. But know that oftentimes when financial advisors bless a plan, it's a 3% failure rate or less. We want our clients to have as high of a likelihood of success as possible. So, you know, 97% is kind of the gold standard in our industry. But I think a lot of clients, when they understand this, would be, you know, rather than work the extra 3 to 5 years it takes to go from an 80% likelihood of success to a 97%, a lot of people would say, you know what, give me 100% likelihood that I get to enjoy, you know, I can retire at 55 and enjoy 10 more years of retirement. I have 100% likelihood of that. And if I get lucky and I end up in that lower half below the median, you know, we'll make some adjustments along the way. Maybe I take a part-time job. Maybe we cut back on our spending. Maybe, you know, we only buy used cars instead of new cars for a while. Things like that. So anyways, enough said. And then the fifth one, remember I said there's 5 secrets. The fifth one is to prepare mentally for retirement. So often people hit their financial number, but they're not ready mentally yet to retire. And they end up spending 2 or 3 years to get ready mentally, work that they could have done earlier. You know, how am I going to react when I give up my identity at work? For many of us, we've been doing what we do for 15, 20, 30, 40 years. It's hard to give up that job. And so preparing mentally for this as we're building our financial net worth is really important. And there's 2 books that will really help you with that. One book is called From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks. He talks about these different phases that we go through in life and how to successfully transition. And then the other one is a book called Die with Zero. Don't let the title throw you off. By a gentleman by the name of Bill Perkins, where he really talks about you get more joy from your money in your 50s and your early 60s than you do in your mid 70s, your late 70s, and your 80s. So enjoy your money while you can. Get that, what he calls marginal utility, while you still can. It's a great book. You'll enjoy both of those. You'll also enjoy this video up here where I talk about the 7 things that I want you to stop doing in your 50s in order to enjoy your time until you get to retire. Your retirement's supposed to be fun, but so is the journey to get to retirement. So I'll see you in that video. Thanks for watching this one. Bye-bye.